I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer. Or I should say I was. For 22 years, I was the managing director at Crestwood Memorial Chapel, a quiet, respected institution in the heart of Des Moines, Iowa. In that time, I personally arranged and directed over 3,000 funerals. I've handled the arrangements for tragic accidents that took lives far too soon, for long, drawn-out illnesses that were a quiet blessing to end, and for the simple, peaceful passings of a life fully lived. I thought I understood grief. I believed I had seen it in all its forms, from loud, wailing hysterics to the silent, stoic sorrow that carves canyons into a person's face. I thought I knew the boundaries of family dynamics, the quiet tragedies and unspoken histories that surface when someone dies. I believed I knew the limits of what one human being could do to another. But a little over 6 months ago, one family, the Ashworths, came through my doors and changed everything I thought I knew about loss and about life itself. What happened within the walls of my funeral home was so profoundly disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that I tendered my resignation 2 weeks after their services concluded. This case didn't just challenge me, it shattered my ability to do my job. It haunts me in a way that no car crash, no unexpected illness, no tragic loss ever could. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. A story that seems to belong in a grim novel rather than the hushed, sterile reality of a modern funeral home. But it is the absolute truth of my final and most haunting case. The profession of a funeral director is one of quiet order in the face of chaos. We are administrators of the final rite of passage, navigating a sea of paperwork, regulations, and raw human emotion. Our days are ruled by schedules, by the precise timing of embalming fluid mixing with tissue, by the arrival of death certificates, and by the careful choreography of a memorial service. There is a rhythm to it, a predictable cadence that offers comfort not just to the families we serve, but to us as well. It's a shield. You learn to focus on the tasks. The first call, the transfer of the deceased from the place of death into our care, the arrangement conference with the family, the meticulous work in the preparation room. You focus on the details, the choice of a casket, the selection of hymns, the wording of an obituary, because the details are manageable. The overwhelming, crushing reality of death is not. For 22 years, this system worked for me. It allowed me to stand beside open graves in the pouring rain, to comfort widows and orphan children, and to go home at the end of the day, wash my hands, and feel that I had done some small good in a world that often felt senseless. Crestwood Memorial Chapel was my sanctuary in that regard. It was a beautiful old building, a converted Victorian mansion with high ceilings and intricate woodwork, smelling faintly of lilies, lemon polish, and the deep, clean scent of formaldehyde from the prep room in the basement, a scent no amount of ventilation could ever fully erase. It was a place of dignity. I made sure of it. The inciting incident, as it always does, began with a phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, the sky the color of slate. My apprentice, a good-hearted young man named David, took the call. He'd only been with me for about a year, still learning the delicate art of speaking to the bereaved. He covered the receiver and looked at me, his eyes wide with the practiced solemnity of the newly initiated. "It's a first call," he whispered, as if the words themselves were fragile. "Eleanor Ashworth, age 87, passed at her residence. The family doctor was there. It's an expected death." Expected death. In our world, those are the easy ones. No coroner, no autopsy, no lingering questions. Just the natural, quiet end of a long life. I nodded, and David professionally collected the necessary information. The address, the name of the next of kin, the doctor who would be signing the death certificate. Everything was by the book. Routine. I took my black suit coat from the back of my chair and straightened my tie. "All right, David," I said. "Let's go bring Mrs. Ashworth into our care." The Ashworth residence was in one of the older, wealthier neighborhoods of the city. A sprawling Tudor-style house set back from the road on a large, manicured lawn covered in a blanket of damp, yellow leaves. The air of money was palpable, but so was a sense of stillness, of neglect. The paint was peeling slightly on the window frames, and the grand oak door looked like it hadn't been oiled in years. We were met at the door by the eldest son, Thomas Ashworth. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and severe, dressed in a crisp shirt and trousers that seemed too formal for a house of mourning. He didn't look sad. He looked impatient. "You're from Crestwood?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes, sir. I'm Michael, the director, and this is my associate, David. We're very sorry for your loss." I offered the standard, practiced condolence. It usually elicited a nod, a tear, a choked, "Thank you." From Thomas Ashworth, it elicited nothing. He simply stepped aside. "She's upstairs. In her room," he said, gesturing vaguely up a grand, curving staircase. He didn't offer to lead us. He just stood there, his arms crossed, as if we were delivery men there to pick up a package. A sense of unease, small but sharp, pricked at the back of my neck. This was unusual. Families, even the most dysfunctional, typically cling to these last moments. They want to show you the room, tell you a story about the deceased, to be present for this final departure from the home they loved. Thomas Ashworth looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. David and I exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. We retrieved our transfer cot from the van and brought it inside, the rubber wheels silent on the polished hardwood floors. The house was cavernous and cold, not just in temperature but in spirit. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light slanting through the tall windows. The furniture was expensive but shrouded in sheets, as if the house had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. As we ascended the stairs, a woman and another man emerged from what looked like a study. They were, I presumed, the other children, Clara and Robert. Clara was as severe as her brother, her face a tight mask of composure. Robert was softer, his eyes red-rimmed, but he seemed more lost than grief-stricken. They watched us pass without a word. The silence in that house wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive, full of things unsaid. Eleanor Ashworth was in a large, dark bedroom at the end of the hall. The curtains were drawn. She was lying in a four-poster bed, a thin sheet pulled up to her chin. She was a tiny woman, made even smaller by death, her skin pale and translucent, her white hair fanned out on the pillow. At first glance, it was exactly as the doctor would have described it, a peaceful passing in her sleep. But as David and I began our work, the gentle and respectful process of moving her from the bed to our cot, I noticed things. Small things that my 22 years of experience had trained my eyes to see. There was a faint, yellowish bruise on her left temple, partially hidden by her hair. There were discolored marks on her wrists, faint but symmetrical, almost like old ligature marks. They were faded, certainly not from the last few days, but they were there. And her expression, we have a term in the trade, setting the features. It's the process of closing the eyes and mouth to create an expression of serene repose. Most of the time, the muscles are relaxed in death. But Eleanor Ashworth's features were not relaxed. There was a tension in her jaw, a faint, deep-set look of what I could only describe as fear etched around her eyes. It was a look I'd seen on victims of violent crime, not on an 87-year-old woman who had died in her own bed. I said nothing to David, not yet. He was still too new, and I didn't want to plant ideas in his head. We completed the transfer, covered Mrs. Ashworth with a velvet pall, and wheeled the cot back down the stairs. The three siblings were waiting in the foyer, standing together like a panel of judges. "We'll need to schedule an arrangement conference," I said, keeping my voice soft and professional. "We can do it tomorrow at your convenience at the chapel. 9 a.m. Thomas said, not asking but stating. "We want this handled quickly. A simple, traditional service. Closed casket." "Closed casket?" I asked. It was a bit of a surprise. Given she had supposedly passed peacefully, most families would want an open casket for viewing. "Of course. That is entirely your decision. I'll just need to get some clothing for your mother. Something she loved, perhaps a favorite dress." Clara stepped forward, her purse clutched in her hands. "That won't be necessary. We'll drop something off. Just make her look presentable." The word presentable hung in the air, cold and clinical. It was the kind of word one uses for an object, not a beloved mother. "Of course," I said again, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. We moved toward the door. As we were leaving, Robert, the younger brother, mumbled, "Thank you." It was the first glimmer of recognizable human emotion I had encountered in the house. Thomas shot him a look that was sharp enough to cut glass, and Robert fell silent. Back in the van, the silence stretched between me and David. The professional barrier was up. We don't gossip about families. We don't judge, but some things are too loud to ignore. Finally, as I turned onto the main road, David spoke, his voice low. Did you see her wrists, Michael?" I kept my eyes on the road. I did. And her face? She didn't look peaceful. "No," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. She didn't. That was the beginning. The first thread in a tapestry that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my profession. We brought Eleanor Ashworth into the quiet, sterile sanctity of our preparation room. The initial paperwork was filed. The death certificate was on its way from the doctor, listing the cause of death as cardiomyopathy and natural causes. Everything on paper was perfectly normal. But the body on my embalming table was telling a different story. And the cold, detached behavior of her children was the prologue to a chapter one was becoming increasingly certain I did not want to read. My job was to prepare the dead and comfort the living. But for the first time in my career, I had the chilling premonition that the dead needed protection from the living. The next morning, the Ashworth siblings arrived at Crestwood Chapel at precisely 9 o'clock for the arrangement conference. They sat across from me at the large mahogany table in my office, a united front of cold composure. Thomas acted as the spokesman, his voice a clipped monotone as he laid out their wishes. As I said, a traditional service. 2 days from now, we want the cheapest available casket that is still respectable. A simple oak or pine. Closed, of course. 1 viewing hour for the public before the service. No eulogies from the family. No eulogies? I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. Often, sharing memories can be a great source of comfort. Clara answered this time, her voice thin and brittle. Our family is private. We don't care for public displays. A reading from the Bible by a minister will suffice. We have one we will be contacting. I nodded, making notes on my legal pad. Every request was about speed, cost efficiency, and distance. They were planning a funeral the way one might plan a corporate merger, stripping it of all sentiment and humanity. I walked them through the necessities. The obituary notice for the paper, the choice of memorial cards, the music. For the obituary, Thomas provided only the barest of facts. Eleanor Ashworth, beloved mother of Thomas, Robert, and Clara, preceded in death by her husband George Ashworth. Private interment. No mention of grandchildren, hobbies, her life's work. I prompted gently. That won't be necessary, Thomas said, a note of finality in his tone. The entire conference lasted less than 30 minutes. It was the most sterile, loveless arrangement I had ever conducted. As they were preparing to leave, I brought up the matter of clothing again. If you could bring in a dress for your mother today, it would be helpful. We'll need it for when we begin the dressing and cosmetizing. Clara looked at Thomas. A silent, tense communication passed between them. We'll have it dropped off this afternoon, she said. And then they were gone, leaving behind a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Later that day, a courier service, not one of the family members, delivered a simple cardboard box. Inside was a plain, high-necked, long-sleeved gray dress. It was clean but old and threadbare in places. Felt joyless. Tucked into the box was a small velvet pouch. I opened it and found a simple silver locket. It seemed like the first genuine article of sentiment I'd seen from them. I opened the locket, expecting to see a picture of their father, George. But it wasn't him. On one side was a faded photograph of a much younger Eleanor. On the other side was a picture of a little girl, no older than 4 or 5, with bright eyes and a wide, happy smile. I didn't recognize her. There were no grandchildren listed. Who was this child? I placed the locket aside, a new piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. That evening, it was time to begin the embalming. This is a process that, for all its clinical nature, I have always found to be deeply respectful. It is the last act of care we can provide a person, a way to grant them a final measure of dignity, to restore a peaceful, lifelike appearance for their loved one's final goodbye. David assisted me. The preparation room at Crestwood is a state-of-the-art facility, all stainless steel and tile, brightly lit and meticulously clean. It is a place of science and chemistry. We placed Mrs. Ashworth on the porcelain table. Under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights, the things I had noticed in the dimness of her bedroom were thrown into stark relief. The bruising on her wrists was undeniable. They were old, yellowed, and mottled, but they were there. As I began to wash her body, a standard first step, I found more. A pattern of small, circular bruises on her upper arms, perfectly spaced, like fingerprints left by someone gripping her with immense pressure. And another large, faded bruise on her lower back. These were not the marks of a simple fall. They spoke of a history of being restrained, of being handled roughly. "Michael," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "Look at this." He pointed to her feet. Her toenails were overgrown and discolored, a clear sign of neglect. Her skin was dry and papery, showing signs of dehydration. This was not a woman who had been cherished and cared for in her final days. This was a woman who had been allowed to wither. The feeling of wrongness was now a blaring alarm in my gut. "Document everything, David," I said, my voice tight. "Take photos. Use the small digital camera. No flash. Just document it." This was a massive breach of standard protocol. We are not forensic investigators. But I felt a duty that superseded my job description. A duty to Eleanor. As David quietly took the photos, I proceeded with the embalming. It's a technical process. Raising the carotid artery, injecting the arterial fluid, a mixture of formaldehyde, water, and other chemicals to preserve and disinfect. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the image of her children's cold faces. I couldn't ignore the story her body was telling me. The story was one of neglect, of cruelty. Was it criminal? I didn't know, but it was profoundly morally wrong. The most difficult part was setting her features. That look of deep-seated fear was locked into her muscles. It took all of my skill, all of my 22 years of experience, to soften her expression, to gently coax her mouth into a line of placid rest, to make her look like she was sleeping. But it felt like a lie. I was creating an illusion of peace for a woman who I was increasingly sure had known none. I felt like a forger, an accomplice after the fact, creating a piece of propaganda for a family that didn't deserve it. After the embalming was complete, as I was performing the final cavity treatment, I felt something unusual. A small, hard lump in the upper part of her stomach. It wasn't a tumor, it was too defined, too artificial. Following our protocols for such a situation, which usually involves pacemakers or other medical devices, I made a small secondary incision. What I removed was not a medical device. It was a small, tightly folded piece of plastic, like a piece of a Ziploc bag. And inside it, protected from bodily fluids, was a piece of paper. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked over at David, who was cleaning instruments at the other side of the room, his back to me. My hands shaking, I carefully unfolded the note. The handwriting was shaky, the frantic scrawl of an elderly person. Said only 4 words. "He knows. Don't let them. He knows. Who is he? Don't let them do what? Don't let them bury me? Don't let them get away with it?" I stood there, under the sterile lights of my prep room, holding this message from the dead. The air grew thick and heavy. This was no longer a case of passive neglect. This was something else entirely. This was a secret Eleanor Ashworth had died to protect, or perhaps a secret she had died because of, and she had tried, in her final, desperate moments, to pass it on. Now it was in my hands. The professional shield I had spent 2 decades building had just been shattered into a million pieces. I slipped the note into my pocket. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? My legal, professional obligation was clear. Complete the preparation, conduct the funeral as the family instructed, and file the paperwork. The death certificate, signed by a doctor, said, "Natural causes." That was the official story. My own evidence, the bruises, the signs of neglect, and now this cryptic, terrifying note, told a different one. To challenge the official story was to invite a world of trouble. It meant accusing a prominent family of something monstrous. It meant questioning a medical professional's diagnosis. It would be my word, the word of a funeral director, against theirs. Could ruin Crestwood Memorial, the business I had built, my life's work. I shared my findings with my business partner, Mark. Mark was a good man but pragmatic to a fault. He handled the books, the finances, the business end of death. I handled the bodies and the grief. We met in my office the next morning, before the funeral home opened. I laid it all out for him. The family's bizarre behavior, the physical evidence on Mrs. Ashworth's body, the photographs David had taken, and finally, the note. I placed the small plastic bag on the polished surface of my desk between us. Mark listened patiently, his face growing grimmer with each detail. He picked up the bag, looking at the note through the plastic. He read the 4 words. He knows, "Don't let them." And then he put it down and slid it back across the desk to me. He leaned back in his chair and sighed, a long, weary sound. "Michael," he said, his voice low and cautious, "what do you think you're going to do with this?" "I don't know, Mark. I have to do something. This isn't right. That woman was mistreated. At best, it's elder abuse and neglect. At worst, I don't even want to think about it. We can't just bury this. Literally." "And what's the alternative?" he countered, his voice hardening. "You go to the police? With what? A few old bruises that could be explained away a dozen different ways? A note that could be anything? Dementia-fueled paranoia? A message about a bridge game? Michael, the death certificate is signed. Dr. Alastair is one of the most respected physicians in this city. You go to the cops with this, you're not just accusing the Ashworths, you're accusing him of negligence or a cover-up. They will close ranks. The family will sue us for defamation, for emotional distress. They will destroy us. And for what? A hunch?" His words were like a bucket of ice water. He was right, of course. From a legal standpoint, I had nothing. My evidence was circumstantial, open to interpretation. The note was damning to me, but in a court of law, it was meaningless without context. I was feeling the cold, hard reality of institutional betrayal. The system, the very one I worked within, was designed to protect the status quo. It was designed for clean paperwork and tidy conclusions. It wasn't designed for a funeral director with a conscience and a message from a dead woman in his pocket. I was completely, utterly alone in this. "So we just do it?" I asked, my voice hollow. "We dress her up, put her in a box, and let them stand over her grave and pretend they loved her? We do our job," Mark said firmly. "Our job is to carry out the wishes of the next of kin. That's it. It's not our place to be judge and jury. For God's sake, Michael, think about what you're risking. Your license, this business, everything." He stood up, his face set in a mask of grim finality. "Bury it, Michael, for all of our sakes." He left my office, and I sat there, the note on the desk feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My professional inadequacy was a bitter pill to swallow. I, who had always taken such pride in my ability to bring dignity to the deceased, was being forced to participate in a lie. I was being asked to help a family of monsters maintain their facade. My protective instinct towards Eleanor, a woman I'd never met in life, was raging. She had tried to tell someone. She had tried to leave a warning, and I was being told to ignore it. That day was a blur of misery. David and I dressed Mrs. Ashworth in the drab gray dress the family had sent. As I fastened the buttons at the high neck, I felt like I was concealing a crime. We placed the silver locket around her neck, its secret photograph of the unknown little girl resting against her still chest. We placed her in the simple oak casket they had chosen. As I closed the lid for the final time, knowing it would remain closed, I felt a profound sense of failure. I had failed her. The next 24 hours were an exercise in escalating tension. The family's behavior grew stranger. Clara called 3 times, each time with a different minute instruction. First, it was about the specific type of flowers for the casket spray, only white roses, no baby's breath. Then, it was about the placement of the memorial register book. It had to be on a specific table to the left of the entrance, not the right. Finally, she called to say they were changing the time of the private family viewing, moving it from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. with no explanation. Each call was a power play, a way of asserting control, of reminding me that they were in charge. The public viewing hour was a somber, uncomfortable affair. A handful of elderly friends of Eleanor's came, looking confused and sad. They would sign the book, murmur their condolences to the stoic, unmoving wall of the three Ashworth children, and then leave, their faces etched with a quiet disappointment. They had come to say goodbye to a friend, and were met with a closed box and an atmosphere as welcoming as a tomb. I watched the family. They stood together, a perfect portrait of bereaved children. They accepted the condolences with practiced, solemn nods. But their eyes were cold, watchful. They weren't mourning a loss. They were guarding a secret. And I was their unwilling accomplice, the master of ceremonies for their grotesque play. The true escalation, however, came from an unexpected source. During the public viewing, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was in her late 60s with kind, worried eyes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low. "You're the director?" "I am," I replied. "I was Eleanor's neighbor for 30 years, she said. "I'm Martha. I can't believe she's gone. I haven't seen her in months. They wouldn't let me." "They?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Her children," she whispered, glancing nervously toward them. "After George passed 5 years ago, they just took over. They let her caregiver go. They said they would handle things, but they started keeping her inside. Anytime I'd call, Thomas would say she was resting. Anytime I'd stop by, Clara would say it wasn't a good time. It was like she was a prisoner in her own home. I called Adult Protective Services once, about 6 months ago. I was worried. My blood ran cold. "What happened?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "They sent a caseworker out. The family must have put on a good show. The case was closed. No evidence of abuse or neglect. After that, they wouldn't even speak to me. I just feel so guilty. I should have tried harder." "You did what you could," I said, the words feeling inadequate. But her story was the context I needed. Confirmed everything. The neglect was real. The isolation was deliberate. And the system had already failed Eleanor once. Now I understood the note even more clearly. He knows. Was she talking about the caseworker, the doctor, or someone else entirely? Don't let them get away with what they did to me. Martha's confession solidified my resolve. Mark's pragmatism be damned. Couldn't let this go. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I could not be silent. The stakes had been raised. This wasn't just about my professional ethics anymore. It was about justice for a woman who had been systematically erased by her own family, first in life and now in death. My existential crisis was deepening. What was the point of my profession if it was just about aesthetics? If it meant providing a beautiful frame for an ugly, rotten picture? As the last of the public guests departed, leaving me alone in the chapel with the Ashworths and their terrible secret, I knew the night was far from over. I had a feeling their strange, late-night private viewing would be the final act of this tragedy, and I had to be ready for it. The funeral home grew quiet after the public viewing. The scent of the white roses on the closed casket was cloying, almost suffocating. David went home, leaving me to lock up after the family's private gathering. I walked through the hushed, empty viewing room, my footsteps echoing on the polished floors. I straightened a hymnal, adjusted a floral arrangement. Mundane tasks that I hoped would ground me, but my mind was a storm of Martha's words and the image of the note in my pocket. It was like she was a prisoner in her own home. At 5 minutes to 9, the Ashworths returned. Just the three of them. They moved with a strange, purposeful energy, not like a family settling in for a final, quiet moment of reflection. but like executives arriving for a late-night board meeting. Thomas was holding a leather briefcase. "We will require an hour," he announced, not looking at me. "We are not to be disturbed." "Of course," I said. "I'll be in my office if you need anything." My office was adjacent to the main viewing room, connected by a short hallway but separated by a thick oak door. I left their door slightly ajar, a common practice to allow me to hear if I am called, but tonight my reasons were my own. I went into my office, turned on the small desk lamp, and sat in the dark, listening. For the first 20 minutes, there was only silence. A heavy, unnerving silence. I imagined them standing there, staring at the polished wood of the casket, and I wondered what they could possibly be thinking. Then the voices began. They were low at first, muffled. I couldn't make out the words, just the tense, angry cadence. It wasn't the sound of grief. It was the sound of an argument. I crept out of my office and stood in the shadows of the short hallway, just out of sight of the viewing room's entrance. Now I could hear them clearly. "Did you check the safe?" It was Clara's voice, sharp and accusatory. "Of course I checked the safe," Thomas shot back. "It's not there. The original will, the trust documents, the bearer bonds. All gone. All that's in there is the amended will she signed last year, the one that splits everything 3 ways. She must have moved them," Robert mumbled, his voice shaky. "She must have known we were going to." He trailed off. "Going to what, Robert?" Thomas snapped. "Going to finally take control of our own assets." She was losing her mind. She was going to give it all away to that charity. Or worse. There was a pause. Then Clara spoke again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that chilled me to the bone. "What about the other thing? The reason we had to expedite this?" "It's handled," Thomas said. "She can't tell anyone now. No one will ever know what really happened to him. We're finally free of her, and of that whole mess." My breath caught in my throat. Him. He knows. The note. It wasn't about a doctor or a caseworker. It was about someone else. Another victim. And then Robert, the seemingly weaker one, delivered the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and guilt. "What if she told someone? What if she left something behind? A letter? Like she did for Dad?" My mind flashed to the locket. The little girl. And then it all clicked into place with a sickening finality. George Ashworth, their father, had not died of a heart attack 5 years ago, as the obituary had stated. Eleanor had left a letter then, too. And this little girl in the locket. Who was she? The him they were talking about. It wasn't their father. It was someone else. A hidden crime. A family secret so dark they had silenced their own mother to protect it. The neglect, the isolation, it wasn't just about money. It was about keeping her from exposing a much older, much deadlier secret. They hadn't just let her die. They had created the conditions for her death to ensure her silence. This was a confession. A confession to, at the very least, a conspiracy that resulted in their mother's death, and a hint at something far, far worse from their past. I felt a wave of nausea. I backed away slowly, retreating to the sanctuary of my office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat down at my desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely function. The truth was more monstrous than I could have ever imagined. These weren't just greedy, neglectful children. They were criminals covering up a generation of secrets. What could I do? I had an overheard conversation. No recording, no witnesses other than me. It was still my word against theirs. A word that my own business partner had already warned me not to speak. I looked at the phone. I could call the police right now. I could tell them everything. But Mark's words echoed in my head. They will destroy us. The institutional betrayal felt absolute. I was trapped between my conscience and my career, my morality and my livelihood. Their hour passed. I heard the door to the viewing room open. I composed myself, smoothed my tie, and walked out to meet them, my face a carefully constructed mask of professional placidity. "Is everything all right?" I asked. Thomas looked at me, his eyes cold and assessing. For a moment, I was terrified he could see the truth in my face, that he knew I had heard. But he just nodded curtly. "We're finished here. We will see you at the service tomorrow." They left. I locked the doors of the chapel, the sound of the bolt sliding home feeling like the door of a prison cell. I was alone with Eleanor Ashworth, her silent casket a monument to all the secrets it held. That night I didn't go home. I sat in my office, the note and the locket on the desk in front of me, and I made a decision. The funeral the next day was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I stood at the lectern, looking out at the small crowd of her friends, at the three monsters sitting in the front row, their faces perfect masks of sorrow. I read the 23rd Psalm, my voice steady, but the words, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," tasted like a lie. The evil was right here in the front pew dressed in black. I watched them accept condolences, their hands cool and dry as they shook the hands of people who genuinely mourned their mother. It was the most profane performance I had ever witnessed. At the cemetery, as the casket was lowered into the cold earth, I caught Robert's eye. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Not just guilt, but terror. He knew they were damned. But then the mask was back in place. I had made my choice. I would not go to the police. I knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that I would fail. I had no proof that would stand up to their money and their influence. I would be dismissed as a disgruntled employee, a man with a morbid imagination. The system had failed Eleanor in life, and I knew it would fail her in death. But I could not be a part of that system any longer. I could not continue in a profession that would require me to serve the likes of the Ashworths, to be the final, dignified instrument of their deception. The personal cost was immense. This job, this chapel, it had been my life. But it was a life that was now irrevocably tainted. A week after Eleanor Ashworth was buried, I walked into Mark's office and placed my letter of resignation and my keys on his desk. He read the letter, his face pale. "Michael, don't do this," he pleaded. "It's one case, one horrible family. It will pass." "No, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It won't. I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't unhear what I heard. Every time I stand in a viewing room, I'll be seeing them. Every time a family tells me their loved one died peacefully, I'll be wondering, it's broken. The work is broken for me." He didn't argue further. He saw the truth in my eyes. The career sacrifice was complete. I walked out of Crestwood Memorial Chapel for the last time, the place I had poured my heart and soul into for 22 years, and I didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. I sold my share of the business to Mark. I'm working now in a library, archiving old city records. It's quiet, it's peaceful, but the haunting remains. The impact is ongoing. I still have the note. He knows. Don't let them. I also kept the photo of the little girl from the locket. I don't know who she is, or what happened to him. I probably never will. The Ashworths got away with it. They have their money, and their secrets are buried with their mother. But I know the truth, and that knowledge is my own private prison. This case didn't just end my career. It fundamentally changed my understanding of the world. It taught me that sometimes the most monstrous acts aren't committed with a weapon, but with silence, with neglect, and with a feigned grief that is more chilling than any rage. It taught me that the dead can speak, but there is no guarantee that anyone with the power to act will be willing to listen. And that is the most terrifying truth of all.